Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for this webinar. I just want to thank everyone for joining us, and I want to reiterate that even though this is hosted by myself and PDAX, our goal is not to make you to buy Bitcoin, right? That's not a goal. We're not trying to make you buy Bitcoin or any other cryptocurrency for that matter. I just want to take this opportunity to share with you what I know about Bitcoin, so that if someone else tells you to buy, then at least we were able to give you an idea. There's definitely a lot of noise out there, fake news, fake information, and we don't want to be acting on bad information. So I'm here to share with you facts as well as opinions, my personal opinions. And it's up to you if you want to buy Bitcoin or maybe you decide that it's not for you. I also want to point out that these opinions are not reflective of PDAX as a company, right? These are just my personal opinions. And most importantly, nothing that I'm about to share with you today is investment advice. Okay, so still, if you're looking into cryptocurrencies for your own portfolio, um, you still have to assess your own risk return objectives before buying cryptocurrencies. So this is not investment advice. Um, Next thing I want to say is a lot of the content that we'll cover today, they're actually quite complex, but we're discussing them in the simplest terms. So obviously, if you're very familiar with cryptocurrencies or if you're well versed in macroeconomics, a lot of these things will seem too simplistic, right? But again, the goal is to give everyone some baseline information about Bitcoin. And lastly, I want to invite everyone to just keep asking questions, right? Because this session is uh, not meant to be just one way. I'm hoping that over the course of this call, if you have questions, that you use the comment box below to ask, and later on we'll answer those questions during the Q&A portion. Um, so yeah, feel free to ask me anything you want about Bitcoin, Ether, XRP, any cryptocurrency. Ask me about PDAX or fintech or whatever else you might want to ask, and we'll do our best later on during the Q&A session to answer them. Now, I have here on the screen a quick QR code. So because we want to make this as interactive as possible, if you can take out your mobile phone and scan the QR code, it will take you to a link where you can participate in our live poll. Okay, so we just have a few questions, nothing too difficult. It's really just to help me, and later on with Q&A, kind of set a baseline for where we are right now. Okay. All right. So if you can scan the link, and let's start with the poll. Okay. So if you were able to enter the poll, then you should see the first question right now. Okay, so the first is just a series of statements. All right, so I can see the answers coming in. Maybe spend mga 10, 15 more seconds before we move to the next question. All right, okay, so I'm gonna move to the next question. Okay, sige, so there are some responses coming in. All right, 10 more seconds. Okay, so let's move on to the next question. Bitcoin is the ideal form of money. I disagree. I agree. I don't know. All right. Maybe 10 more seconds. All right. Okay. Uh, let's move on to the next question. Gold. Okay. So we're also going to talk about gold today. Gold is valuable because blank. So I guess medyo mas mahirap tong question na to. So let's give it maybe 15 more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. So I want to thank you for participating in the poll. Um, let's view the results, at least for the first two questions. Uh, all right. Okay. So to the first question, okay. So I own a lot of Bitcoin. Nobody answered. They own a lot of Bitcoin. Sayang, because congratulations would have been most in order. Next, I bought some Bitcoin out of curiosity. Okay, so I think that's the most common experience, no, of people who wanna take part in cryptocurrencies. Obviously, prices are super volatile, right? Going up by sometimes in the order of 20-30%, and then the following day, babagsak like today, down 25%, see XRP, and maybe down 8%, see Bitcoin. Next is I've heard of Satoshi Nakamoto. Okay, so this is just for me. I ask this question so that I can get an indication of whether you have looked into Bitcoin a bit more. And Satoshi Nakamoto obviously is the inventor of Bitcoin. We don't know exactly who he is, but at this point, kasi it no longer matters who Satoshi Nakamoto is, right? Because Bitcoin has been deployed. Bitcoin is supported by independent nodes, and Satoshi Nakamoto has no more control over Bitcoin. Last and probably the most common, I want to understand why Bitcoin is up. Okay, so given this mix, no, we're gonna spend most of our time talking about why Bitcoin is up, why Bitcoin is being priced the way it is, and then later on, I'll entertain some questions. Obviously, I'm not gonna make any bold predictions that it's gonna be 100,000 by the end of the year. That's not the goal. And again, I'm not gonna insult your intelligence by telling you that it's gonna make you a millionaire. All right, I'm just gonna tell you what I think are the pricing dynamics behind Bitcoin. All right, to the next question, sa poll. Okay, Bitcoin is the ideal form of money. Okay, I agree, I disagree, I don't know. Okay, so this is something that we're also going to talk about, right? Because Bitcoin initially, right, was thought of as money, right? Initially, it was thought of as money, but then eventually, the understanding or the role of Bitcoin changed. Okay? So if you're reading an article from way back 2010, 2011 about Bitcoin telling you how it's going to replace the banking system or replace the central banks, probably that's not the case anymore. But yeah, so we're gonna talk about money to start, and then describe Bitcoin first as it relates to money. Okay. And then yung last poll, maybe I'll cover that later. I'll just start with just showing you this slide. No? So this is 2020. Okay, we saw Bitcoin go up by almost 150%. Gold also performed quite well, but I think this is more expected, right? Because gold has historically been seen as a safe haven, and I'm going to explain later why it's a safe haven in very simple terms. The obviously the stock market is still below its levels before the pandemic, but it has shown some recovery over the past few months. And again, I'm not going to blame you if the initial interest in Bitcoin is really why it's performed really well. Okay. First thing na we're going to talk about is money. All right. So I think in one of the poll questions, dun sa gold, right? I asked there if like why is gold valuable, and then some have answered, well, that's because money is backed by gold. Okay. Now, since the 1970s, right, we actually went away from gold-backed currencies. Okay, so this started with President Nixon in the U.S. deciding that gold will no longer be convertible to, sorry, the U.S. dollar will no longer be convertible to gold, because back then, if you have U.S. dollars, you can actually go and surrender that to the U.S. government, and they will give you an equivalent amount of gold. Okay? So that's how the gold and dollar peg was realized. Okay, but because of a variety of reasons, one of that being uh, the surplus dynamics at the time made it difficult for the U.S. to keep their gold reserves, because countries like France were redeeming gold from the U.S. So there was this parang massive drain of gold, and so that's one reason. Another reason is economically speaking, it's not ideal to peg your currency in something that's fixed or that's scarce. Okay, this is opinion territory. Let me explain. Why is it not ideal to peg a currency against something that's fixed? Kasi if it's fixed, it means na as economic output grows, yung value ng fixed asset na yon becomes higher over time per unit, right? So gold is designed to be deflationary over time, meaning if you hold it today, not spend it today, you'll be incentivized because it'll be priced higher tomorrow. Now, if yung pera natin is something that inherently goes up in value over time, the behavior is to not spend it, right? The behavior is to hoard that instrument. Okay, so if money is something that's designed to be hoarded, then our economy will grind to a halt, right? There's not going to be any spending. There's not going to be any investment, right? So lahat tayo magiging super tipid with our money because gold is scarce. Okay, so that's also one very fundamental reason why pegging currency to something that is fixed is challenging. Okay, so because we're talking about money, and money is no longer represented by gold, well, what does it represent today? Money represents what we call legal tender, right? The right to exchange that piece of paper for goods and services in the jurisdiction that you're in. Okay? So actually, it's written also here. I don't know if it's super visible because maliit lang yung screen. Ang salaping ito ay bayarin ng Bangko Sentral at pinananagutan ng Republika ng Pilipinas. Okay? So this is a liability of the Republic of the Philippines. And if you go to the law, right, sa Central Bank Act, the law actually says that Philippine pesos are instruments that can settle any commercial obligation in the Philippines. Which means if I go to a 7-Eleven, right, and then I tell them, gusto ko ng Yakult, right, and then here's my Philippine pesos, they are legally obliged to accept my money, right? They cannot say, oops, sir, we don't accept that. They can decide not to accept Bitcoin. They can decide not to accept US dollars, but they cannot decide not to accept Philippine peso. Okay? So that's what money represents today. A guarantee from the government that it can be exchanged for goods and services. All right. So if that's the case, how do you value money? Right? It's a logical question. How do you value money? Obviously, you can value it by what it is, right? Which is a piece of paper with the printed faces of very handsome and beautiful people. But that's not worth much, right? That's not worth much. So intrinsic value is not how you value money, right? Okay, I'm going to say that again. Intrinsic value is not how you value money. Because if it is, then it's just worth a piece of paper. So how do you value money? Okay? Money is what we call an instrumental good. Okay? Instrumental good. An instrumental good na we probably are familiar with more commonly is, for example, tokens. If you go to kunwari time zone, right? You're playing a game. When you buy those tokens, they represent your ability to access the goods and services within time zone. Okay? That's it, the arcade shop. Dito naman, Philippine pesos allows the holder of Philippine pesos to access goods and services in the Philippines. Okay? So it's your ticket to the Philippine economy. So how do you value that? Well, there is a gross value to all the goods and services in the Philippines, right? Obviously, it constantly changes. We don't know exactly what it is, but notionally, every car that's produced here, every piece of equipment, every hour or days or months of labor, they translate to an economic value, okay? And let's say yung value na yun in aggregate is X. Okay? Lahat ng currency in the Philippines, ay lahat ng Philippine peso should be somehow equivalent to that X. Does that make sense? Because these are all the goods and services that you can buy in the Philippines, then naturally, all the money in the Philippines, Philippine pesos, should be somehow equivalent to that. Okay? Now, when we look at currency prices, right? Let's say the dollar and peso rate, we see that the peso actually moves constantly, right? Because we're not just talking about, when valuing money, we're not just talking about current use, okay? We're also talking about expected use. Will this piece of money be more valuable in the future? So I'm going to give you a scenario here, okay? Let's say today, all the goods and services in the Philippines, we imagine that to be worth X, right? Pero tomorrow, the US government decides, we won't use the US dollar anymore. We'll accept Philippine pesos. Okay? So let's say the US decides to accept Philippine pesos for all the goods and services in the US. What's gonna happen is yung price ng peso in the global markets will shoot up, right? Because now you're not just able to access goods and services in the Philippines, but also in the US. Okay? So lalaki yung value ng pera, right? Now, how is money exchanged today? Like, how do we transact today? Today, a lot of transactions are actually done electronically, right? Bank transfers. Actually, if you make check payments, these actually are orders to transact cash electronically. And obviously, we still transact using physical cash, right? So I'm going to talk about first the electronic side of things, no? Like electronic money. Uh, we like electronic money because it's easier, it's faster. We don't have to worry about carrying sacks of cash. But using electronic money also comes at a cost, right? Here, dito sa example ko, here in the screen, it's a BPI mobile banking app. I apologize if it's a little small, no, but it's a BPI mobile banking app, 13,000 pesos. Now, this 13,000 pesos, actually, it's yours because the ledgers say so. Okay? I'm gonna repeat that. Itong 13,000 pesos na yun, neto, sa'yo yan because BPI says that it's yours. Right? BPI says that it's yours, and the records of the BPI reconciled with other banks and the central bank say na this 13,000 pesos belongs to you. Okay? It's so mundane, right? Sometimes we take that for granted, but it's actually very important because cash does not behave that way, right? If we go to the right side of the screen, yung physical cash is a bearer instrument, which means whoever holds the cash owns the money. All right? Very, very important distinction. Um, Now, if we're transacting big amounts, it actually doesn't matter um, na digital money relies on a third party. It doesn't matter, right? If we're sending 10,000 pesos to the Zada because nag-enjoy tayo nung 11/11, yeah, it's okay. BPI, pay my dues. However, BPI, BDO, Metro Bank, the whole banking system actually have high aggregate infrastructural costs, right? They have to maintain branches, right? Because they have to maintain branches, they have to hire people. And because they have to pay salaries every month, they incur overhead. All of these infrastructural costs are baked into what banks earn from facilitating payments for us. Okay? Obviously, maraming ibang business ang banks, right? But because we rely on the banking infrastructure, we're bound to compensate the banks somehow. Sometimes we don't feel it, right? But actually, those costs are there, right? Be it because ngayon mababa yung deposit rates, right? Because they're taking more interest margin, um, or simply by preventing everyone from accessing the banks. What do I mean by that? Because magastos for a bank to put up locations everywhere in the Philippines, banking services tend to be concentrated in highly urbanized areas. This we know, right? If you go to a far-flung municipality in the provinces, sometimes walang banko, right? So that's the trade-off, okay? Because we rely on an intermediary, a third party, minsan hindi na sa service lahat. With cash, it's not a problem, right? Because you can bring cash wherever, and you don't have to trust the person that you're transacting with. Pag binigay mo yung cash, okay, it doesn't matter anymore. Like whether you're trustworthy or he's trustworthy, the value gets transferred. Right? So I hope that's clear. Later, if you have questions, we can come back to this. But this is a very important distinction because what Bitcoin is a marriage of the two. All right. Bitcoin is the first digital bearer instrument. Uh, so if, for example, the banking system collapses, very unlikely that that's going to happen, but let's say it happens. Well, guess what? Your ownership of Bitcoin does not rely on the banking infrastructure, right? Does not rely on third parties saying na ikaw yung may-ari ng cash na yon. So, similar to cash, if you hold Bitcoin in your Bitcoin wallet, that is yours. For as long as you hold the private key to that wallet, that Bitcoin is yours. So if there's no third party managing Bitcoin, well, how does it work? Okay, how does it work? Here, sa slide na to, actually, this is just a, it's just a uh, image of a network. No? Okay. Um, you might have heard of blockchain technology. Okay. So that's actually the technology that powers Bitcoin. That's the technology that makes digital bearer instruments possible. How does it work? Well, first of all, it's completely automated, right? It's completely automated. In the traditional financial system, here in this slide here, we actually have a lot of manual processes, right? So nangyayari to medyo madalas, but we don't often hear about it unless it's so big, right? So um, a local bank, for example, may employee who credited himself some cash that doesn't belong to him, okay? So that's a no, that's an operational risk, okay? We don't have any of these risks in Bitcoin because it was programmed to be self-reconciling. Okay? In other words, if sa Bitcoin network, Nichel transfers 5 Bitcoins to Juan, there's no there's no way for me to retrieve that five Bitcoins back. Okay? The network will all update all its records to show na nabayaran ko na si Juan. Okay? And because this approach to record keeping is so secure and it's completely automated, a lot of people thought that this was the ideal form of money. Okay? Na I can send something to anyone, anywhere, practically at no cost. There is some cost, right? But it's super negligible. And no intermediary can stop it, right? No intermediary can say, wait, Nichelle, you cannot pay your money to XYZ person, right? Um, so that's why people felt na it can replace the banking system, or at least the payment system of an entire country or of the entire world. Um, who invented this? Actually, super galing the way this was invented because um, since we started using the web, there hasn't been a way to transfer something of value online without a central intermediary, right? If I'm transferring money, a bank has to attest na nalipat ko na yung funds to that person, right? A bank has to confirm that. So this is really what's groundbreaking about Bitcoin, and it was invented by somebody who decided to remain anonymous, right? His name is, or at least his pen name is Satoshi Nakamoto. Actually, I don't know, could be a he, could be a she, could be a they, a group of people who decided to call themselves Satoshi Nakamoto. Um, and a lot of people are saying, well, oh, this guy invented Bitcoin because he didn't believe in the global financial system and he wanted to change the way we transact, right? Maybe that's true, but actually, he even says here in this white paper, right? The very one of the first statements that he says is that while the system works well enough for trusted third parties to process electronic payments, right? Works well enough for most transactions, it suffers from inherent weaknesses. Okay? So even Satoshi acknowledges na the banking system as a means of payment is actually good enough for most transactions. It's just that for small transactions, right? Micro payments, maybe it's not ideal, right? Because magastos ang banking system. For areas that are unbanked, maybe a blockchain-based payment is ideal because you don't need to set up the infrastructure. And for payments between parties that have little trust. Okay? Maganda example ito is like obviously, if we're in a country where the government cannot be trusted with its fiscal positions, they'll engage in activities that will cause the currency to depreciate, then something like Bitcoin would be ideal. All right. So in case you have any questions, again, please feel free to type your questions sa comments, and then later we'll get to them. Okay. When Bitcoin first started, obviously it was not valuable, right? No one wanted to. No one wanted Bitcoin, right? Kasi where can I convert it back to dollars? Right? Wala pang exchanges nun. So in its early days, the only ones who really wanted to transact on Bitcoin were, unfortunately, maybe shady individuals who wanted to remain anonymous, right? So people who were buying, drugs or contraband, they would transact in Bitcoin. There were also those who really believed in what Bitcoin is trying to do, and they decided now, okay, we're gonna uh, buy and sell our goods using Bitcoin lang. In fact, trivia: one of the first landmark transactions in Bitcoin was someone asked to buy two pizzas for 10,000 bitcoins. Okay? So magkano yung 10,000 bitcoins today? Okay? Magkano ba yung 10,000 bitcoins today? Well, it's about $200 million. Okay? So $200 million for two pizzas in 2010. Okay? So that's one of the first transactions. And obviously today, Bitcoin is used much more, right? All right. Now let's go to what everyone was kind of curious about. Why are Bitcoin prices so high? Okay? Hindi ako makabili because they're so high. Well, first of all, that part is not true. Okay? Even though Bitcoin prices are high, you can still buy Bitcoins because Bitcoins are divisible by 100 million pieces. Okay? So you can buy a very small amounts of Bitcoin, and hey, if it goes up, you go up along with it. So why is it so priced so high today? Well, Bitcoin is also an instrumental good. Okay? We discussed that kanina. It's an instrumental good. When it was priced as money, okay, uh, people thought, okay, what is Bitcoin? Is there an underlying economy to Bitcoin? Okay, so yep, at the time it was being used for remittances, payments cross border, and people assigned additional expectations na, oh my god, this is going to be the money of the future, right? So that fueled Bitcoin prices to go up. In 2017, that was actually one of the peaks, right? Or actually, that still remains the all-time high. Let me just show you this chart. Okay, right. So everyone thought na Bitcoin was gonna go way up because we're facing a decentralized future where Bitcoin is money, and that's what fueled the 2017 price hike. Okay? Pero today kasi, the price hike or at least the bull run in 2020 is less like what happened in 2017. Again, this is my opinion. I may be wrong, but you know, I'm just sharing with you what I know, and later on, maybe you can think about it also and see if you agree. Before I go into the price behavior of Bitcoin, I'll discuss market behavior a little bit. Okay? And this is as simplified an explanation as there is. And I apologize to the economists in the call because I might be playing it fast and loose with some of these scenarios. All right. So if you imagine uh, this to be the Philippine economy, okay, just local lang, Philippine economy. Or sige, wag na Philippines, a country's economy. Uh, we have here the market for goods and services. Okay? So ano yung mga nandito? If you're employed, you're probably here, right? You're being paid a salary to render service. If you're running a business, a hardware store, hard supplies, paper, if you're selling food, you run a restaurant, everybody's here. Market for goods and services. Okay? Any excess funds out of this small economy, typically we put in banks, right? Pasok natin yan sa banks. And what the banks do is they make that surplus available sa debt markets, right? Like they lend to companies for growth, okay? Banks are also the ones you go to if you want to borrow money, right? So if there's excess capital in the economy, right, you can expect that excess capital to be used to fund your loan. Obviously, outside of the market for goods and services, we have what we call the capital markets. Okay? So again, if merong excess funds in the economy, typically they go to the capital markets, meaning gagamitin siya for future uh, expansion or like for future growth of the businesses or of the markets for goods and services. You might ask, well, hindi naman ako nag-invest in the stock market eh. So I'm not part of the capital markets. Actually, that's not true, right? If you have funds in your bank accounts, actually, yung bank mo is participating in the capital markets on your behalf, right? So that's how things work, right? Money goes around. If may excess, it goes to the capital markets, typically, okay? Now, what happens when there's an economic shock, right? A global economic event that affects the market for goods and services, like COVID, for example. Well, what happens is people don't want to go out, people don't want to spend, people don't want to go to the barber shop anymore. So yung economy is actually impaired, right? People are losing jobs. And in order to make sure that we can rebuild jobs, give people more income, the government would actually decide to pump money into this ecosystem, right? Into this whole ecosystem. Okay, we hear about this all the time, right? Quantitative easing in since the global financial crisis. We actually even see it today, right? The Philippine government needs to raise a lot of money to fund the stimulus packages, right? Under Bayanihan 1 and 2. Okay, so governments do this all the time. In fact, the U.S. just decided to print, well, I use that term loosely, because they're not actually printing it, right? But they decided to expand money supply by about like trillions of dollars. Okay, so you can expect that. And why are they doing that? Because they're giving their citizens ayuda. Okay. Um, all right. So what happens kapag nagpasok ng malaking amount of money ang government into this ecosystem, right? So again, am I gonna spend it pagkapasok ng pera? No, right? As a consumer, I'll probably keep my spending at the same level that it was, and any excess will go back into savings, which then goes into the capital markets. Okay, so right now we're seeing this happen in the U.S. Right? So ang dami nagtataka. Hala, why is like the Nasdaq like up, blah blah blah. Hala, it's no longer reflective of like the overall health of the economy because maraming walang jobs, maraming naghihirap, but then the stock market is just going all the way up. It's a sign of excess liquidity, right? Well, if merong excess liquidity, why does the government even pump money to begin with, right? Again, the goal of the government is to pump money so that economic activity can be revived, right? Na people would still build businesses, people would still spend, and that's why they're expanding money supply. Kaya lang, that only works, okay? And I cannot stress this enough. Pumping money only works if there's slack in the economy. What do I mean? If lahat ng tao sa economy may jobs na, right? All the factories are running at full capacity. Lahat ng tao are already working like super long hours. No matter how much money you put into the economy, the output will stay the same, right? It's not the case na pagka nadagdagan ng pera, I can create another shop, right? Or I can hire more people. Um, kapag dumating tayo sa state that's called full employment, right? So in macroeconomics, it's called full employment. Any additional inflow of cash or influx of cash no longer contributes to economic building. Okay? So yung excess, makikita mo, comes out in two forms, right? Actually, I'll just call it one form, right? Comes out as inflation, right? So we're seeing inflation, or we expect to see inflation in the markets for goods and services, or we expect to see inflation in something like the stock market. Okay, so maybe we're seeing that in the U.S. because that's the valuations now of U.S. equities are just probably unreasonably high. Okay, right. So anyway, excess money results in inflation. Well, what about bonds, right? Pagka may inflation ba, are bonds a good investment? Um, I would say na uh, I would say no. Okay, and that's because bonds offer you fixed yields, right? So if a bond pays you 3%, pero yung inflation is expected to go up like 5, 6, 7%, you're actually gonna lose money by being in bonds. Okay, that's the first point. Yung second point is when central banks pump money into the economy, dumadaan muna siya actually sa bond markets eh, right? Because they don't print money and then distribute it to the people. They don't do that, right? What they do is they buy bonds, okay? So they buy bonds, buy bonds, buy bonds to the point na yung interest rate on bonds actually drop, right? And so buying bonds at a time when the government is expanding can be quite expensive. Okay, not to say that it's not a good idea. I'm just saying that it can be expensive. Right now, let's move to yung FX market. How does this all play a part? Okay, yung FX market, think of that as your bridge to the global economy. Okay, that's the country's bridge to the global economy. So I'm assuming a very simple economy muna, right? um, if the currency in that country is depreciating, typically you're gonna see that affect your exchange rates. Okay, so if we expect pesos to become not to become less valuable over time, we're gonna see yung price ng dollar go up, right, versus the peso. Okay, so para siyang bellwether actually, ay hindi pala bellwether, but para siyang overall indicator for how the economy is doing relative to the global economy. Okay. Um, so what's another scenario you can think of here? If yung stock market sa Philippines is performing very 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 well because magaling yung mga companies natin, they're like building new businesses, making more money, blah blah blah. You actually see foreign investors come in, right? Buy pesos so that they can access the Philippine economy, and you will see the Philippine peso appreciate. Okay, that's kind of how the FX markets function. Um, okay, so in a scenario where there's a lot of inflation, okay, and prices in and we're seeing yung FX market react to that inflation, meaning pesos kunwari nagde-depreciate against the dollar. What's bound to happen? Okay, what's bound to happen is our imports will become more expensive, pero yung exports natin will become cheaper. Okay, so ano yung nangyayari doon? Nangyayari doon is we're actually telling the global economy, oy, bili kayo from the Philippines because mas mura, right? And then stop sending us your goods anymore sa Philippines because they will not be taken up because mas mahal, right? So that's how if a country is not doing well, economically speaking, that's kind of how things become a little bit more stable, right? The FX markets will adjust so that we can import or export. Sorry, we can export more. Okay. Uh, Sorry for for that very long backdrop. I hope that was helpful. So ngayon question is, well, where the heck does gold come into the picture? Okay. Um, Gold was not especially relevant before, right? Because if I want to hedge against inflation, you might argue that the stock market might be a good place to invest. Kasi companies are able to price their goods higher, right? So naturally, if yung currency is inflating, uh, yung prices na at which the companies can earn their revenues are also increasing, right? So that's a good enough hedge for just purely inflation. Okay. Another thing that people talk about is real estate, right? Real estate, it's scarce. Sabi ni Lex Luthor, they don't make any more of real estate. That's true. That's the one thing that God doesn't make more of anymore. So it's bound to go up, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Um, so anytime na there are negative expectations about economic performance, we fly towards assets that we think will ride the inflationary environment well. Okay. Stock markets one, bond markets not so much. Gold will ride it because gold is scarce, right? Gold is scarce. Well, real estate is also scarce. So bakit hindi na lang real estate? Well, possibly real estate also, right? In fact, after the crisis in the US, a lot of people just bought houses in the US, right? And then they saw the houses doubled and tripled in value just a few years later. Um, pero bakit gold? What's so special about gold? Gold kasi is not exposed to local economic risks. All right. Nasabi ko na, it's the most important thing about gold in this whole picture. It's not exposed to local economic risks. What do I mean? Itong microeconomy na to, let's say this one gets devastated by COVID. Real estate will be worthless, right? No one wants to live there. Stock market will crash. Lahat ng companies will go bankrupt. Bond markets will also be worthless because no one will trust that the borrowers will pay the bonds back. Okay? The FX market will tank because no one wants to participate anymore in that economy. So, how do you protect yourself against local economic risks? Well, you buy a globally traded instrument, in this case, gold, right? So, uh, what are we seeing in the gold market? Well, right now, gold's also going up, right? Not as much as Bitcoin, and I'll talk about that later. I'm sorry, it's taking a bit long, but that's the behavior that we're seeing, or at least in my opinion, we are seeing. Okay, all right. 2020 Bitcoin prices went up. I showed you this earlier. Take a look at this chart. Okay, take a look at this chart. Okay, yung shape niya. In 2017, there was hype and then crash, and then merong hype ulit, crash, and then there's another hype. Okay? Pay attention. What is this chart that you're seeing here? This one. Okay? Bitcoin? It's actually not Bitcoin. This was gold in its earlier days. Okay? And when I say earlier days, I mean post money days. Okay? Gold has been around for millennia, right? The ancient Egyptians valued gold. Okay? Um, Kaya lang, gold was money up until the 1970s when economies and governments decided that gold is no longer money, gold is just gold, right? That happened in the 70s. And then we saw now, oh, okay, people's expectations shot up. What do you think caused this? Okay? What do you think caused this? What caused this was a global economic shock, right? This is the oil crisis, right? ito yung period ng OPEC, right? 73 oil crisis, 79 second oil crisis. So that was a global economic shock, right? Like because we're also reliant on oil to produce. Everybody in the world was like somehow impaired by the rising price of oil. Gold became pretty popular. But then obviously people are saying, well, wala nang value yung gold. Like gold is not money anymore, right? So the narrative was still there, right? But still, gold remained somewhat valuable. Okay. Now, what do you think is the reason why, beginning the 2000s, gold became super popular again? Okay. Um, there could be a lot of reasons, right? And again, I'm simplifying things. But in my opinion, the globalization of the economy has something to do with it, right? Because if we go back to this mini economy slide here, um, how does this get affected by the global economy? Uh, in a simplified economy, it only gets affected through the FX market, and then your FX market will translate the effects to this small marketplace here, right? 'Di ba? Pagka bumaba yung peso, then maybe the goods here become more expensive for importers, etc. Eh, But today, it's no longer the case, right? Since the 2000s, since the advent of the internet, since uh, travel became more of a uh, not a luxury, but like everybody can travel. Um, the big global companies have businesses all over the world, right? Even Jollibee has a lot of business overseas, right? So this uh, globalization of local economies contributed to the demand of having something like gold, right? Because if I am no longer confident in the Philippine peso, I might be tempted to buy a house sa US or sa China. But what if China is not doing well? What if the US is also not doing well? Right? What then? Okay. So my only option is gold, right? Uh, Stock market, the problem kasi with the stock market is they're also local markets, right? If the US is not doing well, the US stock market will not do well. And there are also company specific risks, right? If I invest in Jollibee, well, what if the food environment doesn't do well, right? If I invest in PNG, most of their supply chain is actually from China, and then China nagkaroon ng lockdowns because of COVID, right? So there are also company specific risks that you don't see in gold. All right, now let's talk about Bitcoin. Okay, um, this one looked a lot like Bitcoin, right? And I'm gonna talk to you about why Bitcoin is very similar to gold. Okay, kanina sa uh, polls, um, okay, ito pala. Is Bitcoin ideal form of money? Probably I'll disagree with this, right? Because it's also deflationary like gold, right? Bitcoin is scarce. There's only 21 Bitcoins that will ever be made. Okay. So gold is valuable because it's scarce. Okay. You know what else is scarce? Um, well, siguro my basketball or my NBA cards. That's scarce, right? But I don't think it's gold, right? The 1950 na bulok na sasakyan. That's also scarce. It's practically rare, but it doesn't mean it's valuable. So there are a lot of things that are scarce but not valuable. Certain kinds of stones, certain kinds of gems. There are rarer metals than gold, but they're nowhere near as valuable as gold. Okay, so rhodium, iridium, platinum, none of them are as valuable as gold. So scarce actually the importance of scarcity is not value, right? Scarce doesn't mean valuable. Scarce means I can trust that they're never going to make more of this. Okay? That's what scarcity does. So scarcity is important but it's not enough to justify value. So yung next, money is backed by gold. I think we kind of like clarified this earlier. Money is no longer backed by gold. Um, Next, gold is used in jewelry, not like BTC. Okay, this is an interesting argument, and people tell me this all the time. Okay, Nichel, ba't ako bibili ng Bitcoin? Right? Gold is valuable. And I say, why is gold valuable? And then they're gonna say, well, kasi ginagamit siya to make jewelry. Um, okay, so tell you what. Uh, Give me your gold watch. I'll give you a stainless steel watch. Okay? Why? Because a gold watch is not valuable because it's a watch. Gold watches are valuable because they're made of gold. So balik tayo sa argument. Why is gold valuable? It's not because you make jewelry out of gold or teeth out of gold or microcircuitry out of gold. Gold is valuable because, more likely, it's universally desirable. Okay? I think that argument holds some merit, right? Maganda siya tingnan, it's yellow, it's shiny, it doesn't tarnish. Yes, maganda siya tingnan. Okay? But it also doesn't explain why it's going up at a time of global economic crisis. Um, yung last point is what I actually think is very important here. Gold is tradable everywhere. Okay? And when I say everywhere, everywhere, governments everywhere find gold to be desirable. Not just desirable, but desirable enough that you can buy and sell gold in these markets. Okay? Maraming desirable items in life that are not for sale. Okay? Maraming desirable items that are not for sale. However, gold is sold everywhere, bought and sold everywhere in the world. Maybe not directly, but governments will always buy and sell gold. Okay? So if you combine that tradability, global tradability, with global scarcity, you have an instrument that can act as an effective um, safe haven in global economic hardships. Okay? If I don't believe in the Philippine peso for now or the Philippine economy, I'll buy gold first, right? Because you know what? If the Philippine economy crashes, my gold will be good in Japan, it'll be good in China, it'll be good in the US. Okay? Now, the same argument holds true already for Bitcoin. Okay? Bitcoin is traded in more markets than gold. Okay, I'm going to say that again. Bitcoin is being traded in more markets today than gold. Um, Bitcoin is scarce. Sometimes you might make the argument that gold itself is might not be might not have the same consistency in all its forms, right? Because there are gold alloys, they can be mixed. Um, uh, uh, Quality may not be the same. Pero with Bitcoin, Bitcoin is Bitcoin. It's computationally perfect. It's computationally what it was designed to be. Okay. Uh, so and siguro this is my last point, no, about gold and why Bitcoin is not yet at the level of gold. Gold today is being traded by governments and financial institutions. Okay, it's not like you and me. We have some savings and then okay, let's buy and sell gold. Ganyan. No, uh, gold has an $8 trillion market cap because governments and financial institutions around the world find gold to be valuable and tradable. Okay, so your next question is, well, what happens if governments and financial institutions start buying Bitcoin? Just think about it. What's going to happen? Well, Bitcoin will likely enjoy the same status as gold, right? In fact, Bitcoin is much cheaper to store than gold. Okay? If you're storing gold, you need armored cars, you need armed guards. If not, then you're paying somebody to do so, like a gold custodian. Pero with Bitcoin, you don't need all that cost, right? So it's, in my opinion, it's only a matter of time before institutions decide to buy Bitcoin, to buy and sell Bitcoin. We're actually seeing that today. because the rules for cryptocurrency trading are actually quite advanced, right? So central banks all around the world are recognizing the importance of having a cryptocurrency market, just like the Philippines here. We have a market for Bitcoin. So I'm gonna stop there. I can't believe now I used up more than an hour just talking about Bitcoin. Um, I'll stop sharing my screen, and maybe we can answer some of the questions that might have come up. Uh, okay. The Asian financial crisis somehow drive the demand for gold. So I would say that. So what drove the Asian financial crisis? So it started when the Thai baht crashed, right? And actually, uh, a it wasn't so much a decline in economic performance that caused that, right? It was caused largely, and I say this, very generally, was caused largely by foreign currency speculation, right? Um, uh, because the Thai baht is traded globally, you had hedge funds in the U.S. also shorting the Thai baht, okay, to the point that it actually crashed, right? And when the Thai baht crashed, a lot of other countries became very afraid of emerging market, i.e., Southeast Asia, blah, 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 emerging market currency risks, and decided to pull funds away from the region. Okay? So what happened was, all of a sudden, companies became a lot poorer, right? Because walang masyadong capital umiikot. In fact, during the Asian financial crisis, I was told na there were days when literally natutulog yung mga traders sa Philippine Stock Exchange because nothing was moving, right? Did it drive the demand for gold? Probably not in this region, right? But siguro I would say more the global financial crisis, right? Because what the Asian financial crisis does, what it just made Asian countries less attractive to investors from outside of Asia, right? In which case they can still invest in their local economies. They can still invest in real estate. One thing that performed really well up until that time was real estate in Japan, right? So yeah, there were other asset classes siguro that benefited. At some point, are you gonna talk about trading Bitcoin? Okay, so I guess I kind of like went to Bitcoin towards the end. Um, so yeah, okay. Um, sige, so maybe if you have any questions, you can always just leave it on the page, and we'll try to see if we can respond to you then. Okay. So yeah, thank you so much for uh, taking time for this webinar. Again, I'm not gonna advise you to buy Bitcoin or sell Bitcoin. Just that Bitcoin today is not just a fringe instrument, it's something that actually has a role in the global economy. How big a role that is remains to be seen. But if you want to buy Bitcoin, just make sure that you are buying exactly Bitcoin and not something else. Okay, so thank you so much for your time, and have a good evening.